What is it's Danny Limelight, and I need all of you to subscribe to According to Woods podcast on Facebook, YouTube, and all other platforms.
What's good, party people? This is According to Woods, and I have the honor and privilege of having the very first female referee for Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, literally on International Women's Day. She's the one and only Allison Leigh. Allison, what's going on?
Hey! Oh, I'm so good. How are you today?
I am tremendous. It is the International Women's Day. Shout out to the awesome and phenomenal women out there. My mom, who's dearly departed, my wife, who is kind of in a corridor in the studio apartment, not in Chicago, Illinois, but somewhere in the parts unknown of Southern California.
Awesome.
So, I mean, Allison, it's not every day that I get to have a pioneer because you are, I mean, essentially like the Ref Aubrey of Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. You are the very first. And also, WWE, they've actually got two female referees, but for Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, like you're the first female referee for that long-standing promotion. That's got to be kind of cool.
Yeah, it's very humbling. Like I'm still processing it, even though it happened like almost a year ago. So, and it's been amazing. It's been amazing.
Now, I gotta ask, like, how did wrestling find you? Because it's kind of fun to kind of get people's, I guess, backstories, like to find out like the backstory of Kane. It's a weird one, right? There's a
Yeah.
kayfabe version, there's a shoot version, so you don't know what's live or Memorex. So, how did your kind of referee origin story begin in the world of pro wrestling?
Oh boy. Well, I think it would start with the fact that I had a long career in comics, in comic selling for 9 years. I just recently ended it. Just retail sucks the life out of you a little bit,
Yeah.
but I loved it. And comics, probably don't have to tell you, very similar to wrestling. So the fan group overlaps. I was hearing a lot about it. Anytime I went to a convention, there would be like these Bullet Club shirts, and I was like, that seems cool. Like, I want to know what that's about. And then when I moved out here, the people I worked with just pushed me in. And of course, SoCal is the place to be for live shows. So, I immediately got to start going to bar wrestling, PWG, just like all these amazing top-notch shows, and I was so hooked. And so then I was lucky enough to go on the Jericho cruise, and just that concentration of fandom there, I was like, okay, you know what? I've been doing Muay Thai for a while. I'm getting in shape. I think I want to try and wrestle. And training to wrestle led me to refereeing, as it often does. So here we are.
Whoa. Wait, so you trained Muay Thai?
Yes, I've been doing Muay Thai for about 5 years. It is a huge passion of mine. At some point in my life, I would like to do a fight because I do a little bit of MMA, but that led me to get in shape to be like in wrestling shape, which definitely helps with refereeing.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, literally, if you can throw a flying knee, to basically get on all fours and count one, two, three, I
Exactly.
mean, that is almost like a great connection. I mean, and we see with Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, one of the commentators, my good friend Blake Bulletproof Troop, is basically on the mic. So it's kind of fun the kind of inclusion of a into pro wrestling.
Definitely. Yeah, I get the number one comment is like, you're quick on your feet. Yeah, that's because I'm a Muay Thai fighter. I don't want to get hit in the face. So it definitely feeds into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I ask, like, where are you training?
Yeah, I have the hat on. I guess I could turn around here. So it's Muay Thai. It's Echo Park Boxing and Muay Thai in Echo
Ah,
Park. Yeah,
right
and I
on.
freaking love it. I've been doing it for years. I train with the same guy every week. It's so awesome.
Yeah, and you kind of alluded to it earlier is you can't really put into to words in like constructs like how big the combat sports community, and I include pro wrestling in it because that is a combat sport. So it, at least in my definition, so to basically have Southern California pre-pandemic like the hub. There was literally, whether it be MMA, Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, the UFC or Bellator coming a couple times a year, WCK, like all of these promotions, and then again, pro wrestling. That was almost like a every weekend ordeal, and that's kind of how I
Yeah.
cut my teeth in doing this very thing, is basically going to combat sports events like all over Southern California and basically getting my lumps in, all of the connection issues and the blubbering of the mouth and everything like that. That was done in real time at such shows.
It happens. Got to go through that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Craig Claiborne says, "Rock on, Allison." Hey, Adam. Heard you guys were on showing love. Thank you, good sir.
Thank you.
Tremendous, so tremendous. So, I mean, it's funny because comics, right? Is that was I don't want to say it's like the first love, but I mean that being your kind of inclusion to an introduction to pro wrestling. I think that's pretty fun. Now, did you kind of peripherally know about it like through the Attitude Era or like the Hulk Hogan? Like I don't know what he does, but I know that guy does something. Like was that kind of your
Definitely.
interaction?
Oh, it's so funny. Like, I had this best friend growing up who was super, super into it. And then she and I, as kids, would go to local Illinois suburb wrestling shows. We're talking garbage man character, plumber character, like straight heel, straight face. I wonder to this day if any of those guys, because I was so young, I don't remember, but I wonder if those guys like moved up and went on to do cool stuff. But yeah, we would watch that, and I was like, "This is great." It was like gritty and raw and super indie. And then when I started going to the higher end shows in LA, I was like, "Oh, this is like that feeling I had as a kid." Like, oh man, it all connects.
I think it's fun growing up in Illinois and watching like a wrestling plumber and the wrestling garbage men, because to me that was my favorite era of WWF, is the new generation era where you actually had a wrestling plumber in TL Hopper and Duke the Dumpster Drozy. Like I was into it. Bob Spike. I mean, talk about pop. I was able to work a couple of the Bumps and Bruises shows. Shout out to Mikey and Marty Hill, and basically got to meet and I'm friends with now one Thurman Sparky Plug. He eventually went to become Hardcore Holly, but him and Al Snow were basically on that particular card, and to not only get to know Bob and his wife Linda, and then even like talk to Al Snow. He's one of the only people, not included Brock Lesnar, that is both on UFC Fight Pass and the WWE Network, because he actually was the cornerman for the UFC Hall of Famer Dan the Beast Severn in the first couple of UFCs.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's so funny, like how your paths can merge with like these people you've been idolizing in this business, especially in SoCal. It's crazy.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So again, so Muay Thai, and then you're like, hey, I'm having fun at these, shows here in Southern California. Like, maybe I could, maybe I could do this. So at what point does that thought enter your mind, and how did you kind of feed into it?
Yeah, I was sort of on a journey when I got to LA about 5 years ago to just get in shape. But when you're working really hard at something that maybe isn't going anywhere, it's hard, to keep going. So I was just like, I remember being on the cruise and sitting at like some cruise Chinese restaurant, like, and I was just like, hey, you know what? I have an idea. It's super hard and difficult and challenging to wrestle. I can tell. I think I'm gonna try and do this. And I spent a full year before I even went to a Santino's intensive getting in shape, because I was like, I'm unathletic. Like, I know this isn't going to go well for me unless I put in a ton of work. So when I did well at that Santino's intensive, it really, really felt good because I put in so much, so much work into it. Um, so yeah, it paid
Now,
off.
I mean, how did you find out about Santino's? Obviously, that almost seems like a world away from like, comic book conventions and comic book stores and what have you. It seems a world away, right? So how do you find out about Santino's?
It's weird because it's actually not, especially here in SoCal. A lot of my customers, the people I worked with, they were all students. I remember this really, really shy, quiet dude came in. I was like, "Oh, Santino's hoodie. Are you a wrestler? Do you train?" He was like, "Yeah, I train at Santino's." And I was like, "What?" And that's his alter ego. I would have never guessed. So by that point, when I made that decision, I already had been to a bunch of shows, Santino's, everything. I knew the culture, and I was like, "This is all available at my fingertips. This is awesome."
I love it. I love it. So, you have that Muay Thai background, and then basically going to, I mean, I've known many of people that have taken like the wrestler's advocate course, Adnan Qureshi, one of them, Alisa Marino. So I mean, it's a different type of intensity, right? Like, Muay
Yeah.
Thai and bumps. So what was that like first day of training like, especially in compared to your Muay Thai training?
Well, here's what happened, and I feel like a lot of referees have the same story, okay? So I went to the Santino's, tryout, right? It was like, "Hey, do you have what it takes?" It's like, okay, well, I made it through the day with all my limbs intact. I didn't puke, which, unfortunately happened to some people, but, made it through. So then I started going to a school that Peter Avalon used to train people at. It was like in this little tiny ring in Oxnard. It's still there, but he's not, unfortunately, because he's busy. But anyway, I would go there. I met my boyfriend there, who was a trainer. So then he's like, "Hey, we're dating. Let's go to shows together. Obviously, you want to start wrestling." We go to this show that's at a cannabis festival in the middle of nowhere. I show up. They're like, "Hey, can you ref?" Because our ref didn't show up. My boyfriend goes, "Sure, she can ref." And he's like, "Come here. I'll show you how to ref." So he pulls this other wrestler aside. He shows me about 5 minutes worth of stuff, and I Iron Man this show. 11 matches, like outside in this cannabis festival. You've got that one guy wearing his like Marty Skrull shirt that just sits there and watches the whole thing, and then everyone else like doesn't care at all. But I worked with like some major. I worked with the Wolves Addies there and Anthony Idol. They were all there for my first time, like my first time refing, and they were like, "Hey, like you're actually pretty good at this. You should keep doing this." So that from there, I was able to take the initiative, and so I'm more or less like homegrown, like as a ref, but I've been training through experience.
No, I love it. I love it. And she's a natural, says Craig Claiborne, which is probably what,
Thank you.
Che and Bad Dude Tito, again, for those who don't know who the Wolf Zaddies are, we're talking about those two. And Bad Dude Tito just got announced for Josh Barnett's Bloodsport. I th- I can't remember. I want to say it was like seven, eight. They're somewhere. But shout out to Bad Dude Tito. And Craig Claiborne wants to know because it can be physically imposing. Curious, how tall are you?
I'm 5'10", so sometimes I gotta have a wide stance in the ring, but yeah, it helps sometimes actually to be like, "Hey, this isn't gonna fly. I'm a tall lady."
Yeah, especially, your job as a referee is to maintain order, sometimes be involved when they happen in pull aparts when two guys or gals want to engage in fisticuffs and it's not sanctioned by whatever organizing body that is that promotion. So you have to have some presence.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for the little bit of MMA training I did. I did some at Modern Martial Arts in Pasadena. And then I ended up moving, so that's why I didn't go there anymore. But that taught me how to break up like a wrestling match, like in the corner. I know exactly what to do. I know how to not get hurt. I think it's imperative if you're going to be a ref to protect yourself that way, and it's authentic. It's real.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Nate Wren of Podium Sports says, just loving this interview. Thank you, Nate. You're too
That's
kind.
nice.
Good,
Thank
s-
you.
Yeah, good brother there. Now, how after like that first event where you, I mean, and it's funny because wrestling happens everywhere. Like I think everything is pro wrestling. Politics is pro wrestling, movie star stuff that's pro wrestling, royal like it's all pro wrestling. Once you understand pro wrestling and really get through the meat and potatoes of it, everything kind of becomes a little bit more understanding and you just have a lot more context because okay, face heel, that's what we're going, and sometimes you got
Totally.
tweeners and everything, so it makes sense.
No, I totally agree. You're absolutely right. Everything is pro wrestling.
Yes. So how long after the training at Santino's was that first show?
It was a couple months. It was like 5 months where I was just kind of working on wrestling. And then from that show, I was able to work a show with them, and I was training at MPW, Millennium Pro Wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of just training trial by fire, which has been, brother, my whole career has been trial by fire. That's just been the whole thing. So yeah, so I'm really grateful to all the people who are like, yeah, all right, cut your teeth here. Like that's how I've gotten here.
Trial by fire. That's a good. I mean, there are a litany of pro wrestling Hall of Famers, not just in the WWE Hall of Fame, but other Hall of Fames that basically govern pro wrestling, and that's how they got their start. Is like you basically get thrown out there.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why I love like the young lion kind of constructs in New Japan Pro Wrestling is because like you've got 5 moves. Like all the training and everything, you've got 5 moves. Go out there and
Right.
basically string those together. So I love that. But your story isn't too far fetched from heck even Jim Ross. Uh,
True.
the Boomer Sooner himself. One of the people that I grew up watching and listening to, still do to this day. So it's funny because you're kind of new school but you kind of got brought up old school.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good way to go if you're willing to put in the work after someone sees something in you. So people gave me a chance, which I'm really grateful for, but then I've just worked my ass off like every week to get better and be deserving of that chance. And
No,
that's what all those guys did too.
absolutely, and that's the thing. Regardless of whether it be pro wrestling, combat sports, in any virtue in your life to get the maximum or the optimal results is just like you just have to do it until you get better. You're not going to be the best right off the bat. Now, some people are. That does
Yeah,
happen.
it's
But
true.
again, that's a minutia in everything. Like Elon Musk didn't just like, oh, here's electric car and I'm going to space. Bye. No, it was a progression.
Right. Yeah, I really like Prince Nassim. He's one of my favorite people. Just he's basically a pro wrestler in the MMA world. He was great. He was like one of those guys that was just suddenly great, but then his hands were broken all the time. So that's kind of what I look at is like, okay, well, you do have to put in the work and the technique all the time if you want to be a great like that and burn for a long time.
No, absolutely. Craig Claiborne says, coolness, thank you. She's wonderful. Adam, you're going to have to let me tag along when we can all support this in person again. Yeah, and that's the thing, when we can, right? So in kind of your formative year in pro wrestling where all of this cool stuff happens, you're working a bunch of shows on the SoCal scene, you are included in the fiber of championship wrestling from Hollywood and the United Wrestling Network, and then like COVID hits and it's all weird, so
Yeah.
it how has this time been for you? Has it made you love wrestling even more, kind of like yearning for what you once had?
A lot of people have gotten unique opportunities because of COVID. I am in that position. A spot opened up at championship because of COVID, and I was given it, and because there's nothing else to do, I've had a ton of time to just watch tape. So right now I'm going in order because I've seen a handful of it. Nitro in order from '96, so just everything. pay-per-views, everything we're watching. Me and my boyfriend are watching together. It's been amazing. But watching that stuff is important. Watching my own tape is so, so, so important. And of course, I keep up with NXT and AEW every week, you know? So, yeah, so hate to say it, COVID's been kind of cool to me, uh, you know, and for some other people.
No, again, it's they say that necessity is the birth of all invention, right? And that's what happens. I mean, this podcast wouldn't exist. I mean, prior to
Oh,
July of last year, wasn't doing this. Just,
okay.
making my name, basically going to shows and doing interviews, and then all that stuff happens, and guess what? We pivot. The first part of it didn't do much of anything, right? Didn't do because
Right.
we thought the world was going to end. There were murder
Yeah.
hornets, there were aliens, there's asteroids coming, there's solar flares. Like that was all like I don't know, maybe the 3 month kind of period, just May to like July or whatever, or August or
Yep.
whatever. So but then July was like, okay, things aren't normal, but I mean, here's the thing. Here's an opportunity, and nobody can really say no because you're at home. Just
I
saying.
know, right? Yeah, people adapted by that point, and you're absolutely right. Those first 3 months, I honestly thought my career was over. I was like so bummed because I had so much momentum in the indie scene. I was going to do a lucha show for the first time, and da 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 da, and all these things, collapsed. So I'm really glad though because what I really needed to be doing that whole time was learning TV, and I can't like express how much gratitude I have to Championship Wrestling for letting all of us cut our teeth there. Like it is so important.
Absolutely. Now, Craig Claiborne says classic Nitro. Yes. No, and I'm a WCW guy. Like I've got this is the WWE version, but I've got
Oh,
a
look at
big gold.
that.
Yeah, I've got the big gold here. We've got the something that is pretty familiar with Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. The 10 pounds of gold.
There it
Might
is. That's
Yeah, might be
awesome.
signed by Holly Race. I'm just saying. But yeah, it's kind of fun because again, you kind of have to figure out what this all means, right? And where you're
Yeah.
going to take the opportunity. Now, in terms of your classic Nitro kind of patronage, what part are you in, and who have you been amazed by the most?
Okay, so obviously very familiar with Sting. People less often refer to face Sting with the colorful. I am so about it, and I get why. It's because I like cheesy DC characters. I like Elongated Man and Booster Gold and like the dumbest characters. I love every time he comes out. Like I get color in my cheeks. I just think he's hilarious and awesome. So yeah, so we're pretty early on in like the big era of WCW when they just killed in the ratings. But I'm really liking Lex Luger and just all of these guys like Booker T, just these guys who just all kind of look the same and just are like living their best 80s or 90s life, just
Hmm.
like boom. And it's very different. It's just very different. And I think the biggest thing about it is these guys are so in the moment in a way
Hmm.
that maybe we can't do anymore. I don't know. But they are just living every moment of it. And it's so magical to see.
Oh yeah, and it's funny. You mentioned like some things that we can't do anymore. You definitely couldn't have a Colonel Robert Parker and Bunkhouse Buck and Dirty Dick Slater. Like those wouldn't be socially correct nowadays. So
Yeah,
it's kind of fun.
I think like I don't want to attribute like the good parts of the 90s to like anti PC culture. Like women were treated, like crap. Like that annoys me when I see it. They didn't deserve it, but there's something about that era and people. I think it's more people's interest and the pop culture relevance. And like I was on a seminar and everyone was telling what they got their like first moments in wrestling, and they were all like, "Oh, I watched it with my grandma. I watched it with my mom." And I was like, "That's so cool. This was an era where like grandmas watched wrestling. It was super normal."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I hope it gets to that point. It's big in a different way now, but I hope it gets to that point again where it's like household watching. Like I think that kind of ended with John Cena, but hopefully, we can revive it again.
Yeah, no, 100%. And you mentioned in terms of the incarnations of Sting, well, obviously you are referring to the crew cut, blonde hair, surfer Sting, but you missed like that, right? And I guess in a way of kind of building upon it, there was a point where he had a rat tail, which was weird. It was weird because he's a big hulking guy and whatever, and he's got this long rat tail. This is rat tails, in my opinion, are kind of weird anyway. But just that on that frame was just whoa. And then there was a point where there was, I don't want to spoil it for you, but there was this transition that happened in between Surfer Sting and Crow Sting, and his hair just, I mean, he could have been a Vidal Sassoon a model and what have you, but that
I'm ready.
that yeah, but that part, it was just like a lot of people forget that incarnation, you know?
Oh man. Just to touch on the rat tail, I was born in 92. Okay, so when I went to kindergarten, I had a bowl cut and a rat tail. And I came home crying because people were making fun of me. And I was like, we gotta cut off the rat tail. And it was like a very dramatic moment in my household. It wasn't the bowl
Oh,
cut that I wanted to get rid of. I was like, it's the rat tail.
well, I mean, I guess, looking back in time, it's funny that you would have probably, I mean, would you cut off the would you do it in reverse and like cut off the bow cut and
Oh,
then
that was
do the
not the
rat tail?
problem. None of that was why I was getting made fun of. But, you gotta let a young girl dream. I
Yeah.
had like the little Claire's like stick on earrings. It was like, yeah, it was drip.
Yes, yes. Now Nate Ren wants to know, who is your favorite professional wrestler that you've worked with thus far?
Oh, that's a tough one. There's lots of elements of enjoying working with people. I will say that I really enjoy working with people who like to tell a story and sit out in the match. So like some of my favorite people to work with are Beef Candy, who are on Championship Wrestling, Richie Slade, and his manager Flex. They just know the narrative they're trying to tell. They always know the characters they're trying to portray. And so when we're running, what they want to do is just like it's creating a story, which is my favorite part about wrestling, is violent storytelling.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh, and a lot of people, man. So I know him of a different incarnation. He was Coach Flexo, and I want to
Right.
say that Royce Isaacs was a part of his stable when I was like watching it. I could be wrong.
I think you're
Uh,
right.
yeah, but
Yeah.
I mean, he is just again somebody when you're looking at enigmatic personas, right? I mean, you don't necessarily have to have the best wrestling acumen to get over. You don't necessarily have to have a 5-star match. And I can't remember Coach Flexo having a 5-star match. Heck, even having a match, But he was so enigmatic that I mean, he's kind of like basically gone in, I don't want to say isolation, but there was a point where he wasn't a part of Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. Now he's
Right.
included back, and he's right back up at top.
Yeah, yeah, and they both deserve it as a team. They've been on prime time. They totally deserve that, Me and my boyfriend, because my boyfriend's a wrestler, a coach, and an ex-referee, so he's a great resource for me. And when we watch wrestling together, we want to make sure the minute you come out on the entrance ramp, we know who you are and the character you're playing. All through your match, I want to know who you are. Someone who does a great job. I'm blanking on his last name because it's kind of weird, but he's on AEW. He's Dolph Ziggler's younger brother,
Oh,
Ryan
Nick Nemeth, yeah, Ryan Nemeth, yeah, yeah,
Ryan
Ryan,
Nemeth.
yeah.
Always tells you who he is in his match on the entrance ramp. Utilizes the fact that there's no audience to speak. That's a huge thing you can be doing right now. So that kind of storytelling, at least for me, like I love it, and I think it's super important. I don't think you have to be the best wrestler in the world, physically or anything, if you have great character work. I mean, you've seen it before.
Hmm. Yes, absolutely. And it looks like we're in the comment section. We're getting a heck of a lot of love for old school Nitro because Craig Claiborne says the whole Nitro era was pretty insane, and it did give WWE a run for its money in those days on Monday nights. It was always exciting to tune in and see what was happening. And Allison is killing in a good way.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, and going back to the grandmothers watching wrestling, Craig says my great grandmother was a major wrestling fan, going way back to the day of the old school days on black and white TV. But it was for my mom that treated me to the shows as serious as soap operas. I love it. I love it
It's
because
true.
the great grandmother is a pro wrestling fan, and then the mom is a soap opera fan. I want to say I see. I'm not mad at the whole like kind of male melodrama, female melodrama because it kind of is. When you get a pop, when you get over, it's essentially a Young and the Restless. When I mean, how can a TV show like Raw likes to talk about the longest running episodic TV show, weekly TV show, and whatever. They've been running the same storylines on the soap operas for like 40 years. There's an art to it.
Yes, and it is the same thing as pro wrestling. Hate to break it to anyone who thinks otherwise. It's a soap opera. It's just freaking cool and violent and difficult.
Absolutely, absolutely. Nate says the most weird Sting moment is when he had to be saved
Oh.
by RoboCop. I can tell you some even weirder ones, my friend. I mean that is a weird one. But then again, oh, did you get into like any of the early 90s? Like this is probably the time that you were bored, but like if you could float onto the WWE network and just go on like 92 to 94 WCW Saturday nights and like some of the pay-per-views. One of my favorite pay-per-views is Slamboree, and I'm sad that they don't even have that anymore, but it was like it was Slamboree, a Legends reunion where you could literally see like, a Wahoo McDaniel where a lot of us kind of heard about him, or if you're of a certain age, look at the archives of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, or the wrestler, and kind of hear about but never see in person. And yes, they were past their prime, but like Thunderbolt Patterson, where Dusty Rhodes, a lot of people say that Dusty Rhodes basically kind of liberally kind of borrowed from Thunderbolt in terms of his way and speak. So did Superstar Billy Graham, but you got to see an aging Thunderbolt Patterson, but still, and see a little bit of that glimmer of magic and why they were such big stars in a era before.
Yeah, I think that stuff is awesome. I've done a lot of research on the early days of wrestling. There's a great comic out called the Comic Book History of Professional Wrestling by Aubrey Sitterson. Great read, and he goes so into detail, about kind of screw jobs and needing to be, an actual wrestler and just all this stuff and all this history in the territories. It's such a rich culture. It's why we do so many things to pay respect to our art, like, and why people argue about kayfabe. It's it's an American. I mean, it has branched off to other countries, but what it is now is just an American treasure. You know?
Yeah, in terms of kayfabe being strong, as a 30 some odd year old person, husband, father of many, right? Of four, right? I'm still not entirely convinced that if I shut off all the lights in my house, that I won't hear a gong and the shrill of "Oh, my Undertaker." And that's when kayfabe is done right. It's just like that's that. And sometimes you don't even have to kayfabe. Like Jake the Snake Roberts is probably one of the creepiest, most enigmatic personalities in not just pro wrestling, but anything. You really did believe that Terry Funk is crazy, playing it close to the vest. And it's funny because, like, the dichotomy of Terry, every time that I've been around Terry Funk, he is probably like one of the nicest people ever. Not just in wrestling, but like ever. Give you a hug, and if he's seen you before, he at 70 some odd years old will recall where he remembered you. Like, who
Wow.
does that, right?
Yeah.
But he's middle aged and crazy when he came to the ECW. The guy that literally WCW forgot Ricky the Dragon Steamboat because again, Flair and Funk Paul driving Flair on the table, which is like one of the first like national kind of hardcore spots. Like you can only do that with Terry Funk.
Yeah, I think that your wrestling persona is an extension of yourself. It is real. It's more so than getting handed a script and playing a character. You you have to embody this whole thing. And like I was saying earlier about that era of WCW, these guys live, and Undertaker touched on this. Oh well, guys were really kind of crazy at that time. It's like, yeah, Taskmaster, but they're living this truth in front of this wild audience that can throw beer at you and all this crazy stuff. It's raw. It's where the term raw for wrestling should come from. And
Yeah, I
like,
agree.
can it continue? Maybe not, but it's a special time that we should all revere.
Like, I mean, talk about, as an artist, right? There are a lot of people will talk about, Jim Carrey going too hard in the paint when he portrayed Andy Kaufman, in that
Right.
kind of interaction of like him and Jerry Lawler. Well, in real life, Kaufman and Lawler were essentially working everyone, right?
Right.
But Jim Carrey took it as shoot. So when they filmed
Mm.
all these, like, almost 30 years later, he's literally pissing off Jerry Lawler, where Lawler apologized him. Like, and that was shoot,
Right. Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, the days before social media were magical because you really didn't know sometimes. You really didn't know. Now you kind of know. Um, I appreciate people like One Lorcan who just screams on Twitter. That's very true to his
Yes.
character. He just
Yes.
yells. So some of them will keep it up, and I really appreciate that. But as long as you can really tell people who you are in the ring in that same way and feel that interaction with the audience, like you're keeping that tradition alive. That's kayfabe, It doesn't matter what you do out of the ring.
Yeah. Yeah. So, in Allison Lee's kind of definition of keeping kayfabe alive, who do you think, outside of like the names that we've mentioned and kind of your history, kind of going back, who would you say was like the best of, like, who made you suspend disbelief, like, that brought you into the kayfabe, like they were really who they were?
I think a lot of the guys of the older era do that because of the reasons I mentioned. No social media, their lives are kind of mysterious. They can't document everything they did like we do now. In terms of people these days, my favorite, me and my boyfriend pop every time for Leon Ruff. This dude totally, like, I am not studying anything when he's in the ring like I normally do. I just believe him. Like, it's in his physicality, it's just everything. So he's somebody who still like makes me suspend disbelief even when I'm studying tape. I think he's doing the best job of anyone in the modern times, which is, it's fine if you don't, but I just have so much joy. He sparks joy.
Yeah. Oh, I loved when he won he did the upset of the North American title. I want to say it was Gargano, Johnny Gargano. And
Yeah,
then, they kind of hold him and put the title around him, and it literally drops
it
because he
slips
is just
off.
a skinny. I mean, if you thought like Ricochet or Will Ospreay were like skinny and compact, man, Leon Ruff. Ooh, man, that guy,
Yeah,
he could use a cheeseburger. Shout out to
yeah, there
cheeseburger.
you go.
But yeah, absolutely. But it's almost like that Spike Dudley, but even taking it, and that's one thing, right? Like, is the ability to build on, right? Because
Right.
everyone will essentially kind of generously borrow from an era gone by. I kind of mentioned, the superstar Billy Graham to Hulk Hogan to Scott Steiner. They're literally just different incarnations of itself, right? But basically building on. And guys like Cheeseburger, guys like Leon Ruff, right? They're almost like Spike Dudley, right? But
Right.
but then they talk about the arrow moves. Like, there were times where, like, Spike Dudley, like, you kind of, like, okay, he could win, that's kind of believable, but like him and like Bam Bam Bigelow, like, that'll never happen. Whereas Leon Ruff in his arsenal has made it so that he's kind of made him, like, what he lacks in size and whatever, part of his superpower, right? And
Exactly.
he uses it against literally his larger foes.
He chooses moves and storytelling to sell the fact that, like, yeah, I'm little but I'm fast. I can use parts of the ring, which he does all the time. Like I can confuse them, I can upset them because I'm small. He knows how to tell the story. And to me, like that's what makes me suspend belief is like, can you tell this story that do you even have a story that you're trying to tell?
Yeah, absolutely. Now Nate Red says, and I don't know if you've got there yet, but we're gonna put it up there. The finger poke of doom. Have you heard of such a thing yet?
I have. I have. I
Okay.
don't think I've seen it in action yet.
Yeah.
It's pretty famous.
Not
We'll
missing
see.
much is what I'm saying. And that yeah, it's I died a little bit there, but I also knowing kind of like the inner workings of the whole scenario, that's exactly what would have happened with all of the the emotions and people getting pushed versus the other person and titles being taken away. It's a very sensitive thing, and it's it's kind of cool, but it's kind of grimy at the same context. It's like how you can make like this big hulking person kind of cry over like where they're positioned or what have you. But then again, that shows you that they care enough that like a screw job in Montreal could happen because somebody didn't want to drop the title. And it's just like
Right.
that's that's what you want is somebody your champion to care enough about it that he or she is willing to lose their job and everything. A trip to the pay window, as Gorilla Monsoon would say, to keep this title.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of that, it is a little bit of a question of ego. Now, are you trying to contribute to a giant story that pretty much has had nothing to do with you up until now? Or do you really believe that you're adding to the story and that they're going to ruin it? At the end of the day, the business is you got to do what the promoter tells you to do. Unfortunately, that's however you feel about it. That's the job, brother. So like
Yeah.
there is that element. Like obviously, none of us have agreed with WWE's decisions over the years. At least one or other, we're like, oh, that's so stupid. Well, we're still
What?
watching it every week, you know.
What?
I
Come
know. I
on.
mean, I think they're
It's
great all the time.
come on. Right? Right? Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's the story you tune. It's that's the soap opera you're watching. You don't have any. I don't know why. Like I'm sure people who watch Days of Our Lives weren't like, oh well, do not that they had phones, but hey, you should really do this instead. And why isn't this? You can't. You're watching it. Like sorry.
It happens. The twists and turns. My goodness. Now,
Yes.
in terms of like lessons, because I think there's many a lesson that one can take from pro wrestling, right? And it kind of pulls every part of regular life and what you see being done in every facet. It kind of pulls it all together. So, what is like the biggest lesson that Allison has learned from pro wrestling?
Wow. I've learned a lot. It is one of the most difficult things you could do. I think uh humility, taking criticisms from literally anyone, it's really really hard, and also having the ability to watch yourself fail. It's super difficult. It's something I've been developing. So like not getting defensive when people give me critiques that I don't agree with or that I've heard before. They don't need to know that it doesn't matter. Move on. Take your lump. Um, and I think I'm really grateful for that. For everyone, actually, Odie is someone who tells me things I don't want to hear. And I value him so much for that because he'll tell me something and I'll be pissed off about it for 2 weeks and I'll be like, oh, he's right. I shouldn't do that, or whatever it may be. So learning to take advice from everybody has been crucial.
Shout out to one Robert Odie Brown, one of the major domos of Zebra Talk. The good friend. That dude is amazing. And a wealth of knowledge. And it's funny
Yes,
because he, you're kind of coming up, and he is kind of the him and Jeremy Marcus. They're kind of kind of the seniors, right? And he came
totally.
in an era where he was in the same position as you, where like Rick Knox and the Ballard, like Mikey Ballard and all of these like even tenured referees that have had a cup of coffee in like the WWE or WCW or even in a showing in Impact, so it's just like it's funny how the game evolves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, basically with the new herd of referees at championship, it was passing the torch from Rick, Justin, Nick, Nick Bonanno, who's now a producer, amazing ref also, and Odie. Now it's this younger group, and it's been really special to all come in at the same time because we're all very open to each other's critique. So we'll be like, all right, here, I got to tell you some stuff. And it's totally cool. There's no ego involved. We're all on the same level. We're all watching. Chad Rico is one of our fellow referees. He is killing it. He just debuted on New Japan. He was on he wasn't on Bloodsport. He's been on DCW. Like
Yeah.
he's like my referee brother, and he gives me critiques. I give him critiques, and I can't wait for both of us to just succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait. Now, you were talking about like the difference, right? Like you were saying, prior to like COVID happening, you were going to basically have your first like refereeing spot for a lucha, promotion. So, like, what are some of like the difference between like lucha and regular? Because like there are, like the 20 counts and how in a 6 man or any incarnation of a tag team match, you don't really have like you don't have to tag your partner. It's subtle
Right.
differences.
I never got to do that show. So I couldn't really say for sure. I know. I was so upset. And the promoter was like, they're going to love you. It's going to be great. The weekend that everything shut down, he was like, I'm so sorry. I was forced to shut my show down. Yeah. But I could speak to the difference between TV and indie
Yeah.
shows, which is insanely different, right? Hard cam, earpieces, it's definitely a different vibe of refereeing. I would say so. I don't normally study the refs of WCW that era because it's not what people call for these days. People want very kayfabe refs actually.
Yeah.
Like who I study is like Herb Dean. I study MMA
Yes.
refs. Yeah. So when you're doing indie shows, you let them get their shit in. You let
Yeah.
them do their thing. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. On TV, you have to protect yourself a little bit. So I have to listen to what they want to do and be like, that doesn't make sense because of this. Sorry, I know you want to get your stuff in, but we have to make it make sense. It protects you, it protects me, protects the show. So yeah, you have to take things really seriously when you start doing TV for sure.
I like that. I like that, and that's a good brother. Is Herb Dean, arguably the best MMA ref in the game today. Obviously, we had Big John McCarthy. He's basically filled the commentary spot at Bellator. So and retired, and also you were saying how physically demanding referee can be. Big John McCarthy was somebody who had to step away from refereeing because like he I mean, with all the injuries accumulated, and a lot of people don't. They're like, "Oh, just the fighters, just the pro wrestlers get the injuries." But again,
No.
to be able to pull people apart when you gotta, and he got to a point where he was just like, "Man, this person is literally getting mollywopped, and I can't jump in." So I'm a detriment, no matter what I've done
Mhm.
and all this stuff, creating the rules of MMA. That's it. And Herb Dean is somebody who's kind of like, I guess, ceremoniously taken Big John's place as like the authority for all things MMA refereeing.
Yeah, I think it's so important in this day and age of TV wrestling that the refs, I mean, I might get heat for this, but if you're going to be a TV ref, you really need to be in shape. You really need to get up and down, and you need to have the strength to pull people apart. So like I weight lift every week, 3 times a week. Like once I developed a strong back and legs, my refing went through the roof. Like now I'm confident enough. I had to fight Danny Limelight. I saw him in the intro. I had to fight him in the ring, and I couldn't have done that and been authentic without that strength. So like watching MMA refs is like what people should be doing these days. It's a different time. You need to have that authority and that realness.
I like it. I like it. I think that's tremendous. That's pretty tremendous. Now, in terms of like goals, right? Are there any goals that you have in terms of roughing and roughing in places that might be a whole new world to you?
Yeah, I put out feelers. I really want to be signed. I really want this to be my career. I work super hard for it. A lot of people believe in me, which is really nice. I want to like prove them correct, you know. Ref Aubrey is my mentor actually. So she and I have Zoom sessions where she critiques my matches, and she, oh my god, I would just be nowhere without her. Like she has changed my refing game so much, and she's putting this time into me because I want to be on TV and working. So we'll see. There might be some big things on the horizon. I don't know, but I expect to be on TV in the next 5 years doing my thing.
I love it. And again, you shoot for the moon. Even if you fall short, you'll land amongst the stars. That's one of my favorite sayings. But you'll get, and that's anything in life, right? If you make this big, lofty, almost unattainable goal, you work harder towards it versus having that maybe attainable. Like, oh, I want to do it in 10 years. I want to, maybe not be in shape and be there and what have you. But you work
Yeah.
so hard for that bigger goal than basically setting that medium-sized goal, attaining it, and then going, I don't know. And that I don't know is where a lot of people, not just in wrestling, not just in combat sports, they fail because like once you
Yeah.
get to that peak that where you've been working for, what now? And you kind of have to redefine who you are because you've already done the thing.
Yeah, it's a tough time for people right now because especially AEW is snatching up so many people. It leaves other people wondering why wasn't I picked. It's kind of a rough time, and I mean, there's a million reasons. You could be the hardest worker ever, and it's just not your time. But that's when people should ask themselves, and this is advice I got in a recent seminar for wrestling. Like, hey, work harder then. Clearly you didn't work hard enough. That's a sign. So you need to grind harder. And then you don't have to feel sad. You can just get good.
Yeah, yeah. Either way. Now, obviously, as we sit here on International Women's Day, and let's be honest, it's been a hard kind of deal just to even get women's wrestling to a point of equality, right?
Mhm.
Now it's not just the women's wrestling, but women ref. I don't know if I've ever seen a women's ref before, like of all the years that I've watched wrestling, and we're going back to like maybe baby me 1987. I don't even think that I've seen a female ref up until maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, if that, right? So like what does it mean to you, especially you're going back on and watching all of these older wrestling shows and knowing that you don't have a representation maybe in a generation or a couple generations before, but now it's wide open that you could be considered just like anyone else, just on your work rate, not on your gender.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. I think when the Me Too movement happened, a lot of blinders were taken off for everybody, not just women, not just men. But we realized, there's a real problem in our culture of representation. Like, if there's a woman on screen, she has to be sexualized. Like, that was the case in wrestling. And granted, it was hypersexual for everyone, so whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's like the pendulum is swung extreme. So I get it. I'm going to get some opportunities because I'm a woman. Okay, whatever. I just need to work hard to earn them. But now we can just be people and just be seen for the work that we're putting in. And I guess like what's even more important to me is NFL, getting a female ref. That
Mm-hmm.
is even bigger than anything in wrestling, to be honest, because it's so masculine in football. Like, yeah, it's a great time. I think like the Me Too movement sparked such great heaving change, and eventually the pendulum will swing back to the middle where there really is just equality, and and it's amazing. I love this. I went through it in comics first, like just people realizing, women were treated terribly there, and it's gotten so much better. It's just so normal to see women in comic stores. It's like completely, whatever. And so now it's happening in wrestling, and it's a beautiful thing to be a part of.
Absolutely. So, as a big comic book aficionado as you are, what is your favorite comic?
Ooh, so I have a lot. I have like 9 years under my belt. I would have to narrow it down to the imprint of Vertigo from DC Comics. of the time of Alan Moore, Warren Ellis, Grant Morrison, that stuff as a whole, as a cluster, is like life changing, mind altering stuff. Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, like, oh my God, like anything Grant Morrison's ever written, like he spends most of his life on acid, so you don't have to, because he's like, hey, here's like the other side of the world, like that I can see, and I'm just gonna write it down for you. So I have a couple top picks. Probably the number one would be Chew, which is a more modern image comic that's about a guy who, when he bites into something, he can see where it's been. So he uses that to solve murders. Like he bites a human ear and he's like, oh, this is and then it opens up into this big conspiracy about why chicken is illegal and all this stuff. But I like really crazy, wild storytelling that's gonna like be mind altering.
I like
Long,
that. I like.
long answer. Sorry.
No, I love it. No, it's tremendous, and it's like who's the Swamp Thing guy? Because I mean, I almost feel like he's the comic version of Hunter S. Thompson, which
Yes, yes,
yes.
Alan Moore, who wrote Watchmen and V for Vendetta. Also, Warren Ellis, who's like his Scottish counterpart. Actually,
Mhm.
they both might be Scottish, but anyway, he wrote a book called Transmetropolitan that is about Hunter S. Thompson in the future. It's probably it was the other book I was gonna say instead of Chew, but if you haven't read it, it's awesome. It's all in that Vertigo family. That's just like next level reading.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go down a wormhole because I'm to say it's piqued my interest is because I love everything that is Hunter S. Thompson, and except for like the way that it
Okay,
ended, that was like whatever. But that's how that story ends. I
that's
mean,
that's how it goes.
yeah, it's just it, So and for an artist to be able to go that deep with whatever subject that they're in, and almost like be engulfed by the story. That's it, and to really bring the patron on a ride with them. That's what we all aim for as artists, as creative types.
Oh, I totally agree. And I think people could use some comic reading, some really good comic reading sometimes, because story structure, I mean, you're just learning it as you go. Like Alan Moore, master. Now I have some issues with some of his work, but I have a Watchmen tattoo. I love that book. It's brilliant. It won't ever be done again. And it is quintessential storytelling, character development, everything you need to be a good wrestler.
Yeah. Oh, character development. Ha, I love it because that's what you need. Can't just
Yes,
go forgetting about stuff from last week and
I
expecting the
know.
people to tune in still. So,
Exactly.
yeah. So, Allison, I mean, you've had an amazing. I mean, it's been a pretty young career, but you've accomplished so much in that such a short time. So, there have to be people that have helped encourage you and kind of push you both professionally and personally. So, let's get some shout outs out of the way.
Oh, I have like the longest Oscar speech
Go
ever.
for it.
Like so many people have been so helpful to me. My boyfriend has been so supportive. He'll tell me stuff also that I do not want to hear, and it's only like built me up. So he's definitely someone. Santino's, MPW, Ray Rosas at MPW, and then the Championship Wrestling from Arizona guys were the first people to give me my shot. That's where I actually debuted on United. They just took a chance on the greenest person you've ever seen in your life and let me cut my teeth there. Big shout out to them. Nick Bonanno, Ref Aubrey, who like puts a ton of time into me, and I really appreciate that. And yeah, definitely championship wrestling, like in general, for being really supportive and super cool to all of us who are working there.
I love it. I love it. And again, most people just think that, the United Wrestling Network is just championship wrestling from Hollywood, but like you said, it's championship wrestling from Arizona and Memphis. There's like so
Memphis.
many different, yeah. There was the guy with the hair. Uh
Dustin, he's so
yes.
awesome. Yeah, I went out to Memphis in October for a Halloween show that they had and got to ref for Peter Avalon and all sorts of people. Him and Maria are the best people ever. Like, oh, it's a shoot.
I love that. I love that. Good people doing good things in not just the world of pro wrestling, but just positively impacting the lives of others in a very real way. Where there was a lot of darkness that came out of last year, and for them to
Yeah.
be so kind and it again, like you said, it's a shoot, That's really cool to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and as a woman, I've had no problems whatsoever working for Championship. They've been super cool. The producer's always like, "Hey, everyone treating you okay?" And I'm like, "Yes." They're super cool. So
I love it. I love it. But you've been super cool. And obviously, to kind of get more people on the super cool stuff that you're doing, where can they find Ref Allison Leigh on
yeah,
social media?
I probably should have put my handle like you did. That was very
Eh,
smart. But it's easy. It's just Ref Allison Leigh on Twitter, which I never use, and Instagram, which I use all the time, and TikTok. Actually, I don't remember what my name is there, but we can come back to that.
there it is. I like it. Well, Allison, it's been an honor and a privilege to have you here. Again, you are a pioneer. I mean, you can't be the first female ref in the United Wrestling Network. You can't do that twice, and you're the first. So,
Thank you.
boom. Yeah. And we thank you guys for watching us here at According to Woods. And if you haven't already done so, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe to the According to Woods podcast on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. But I mean, Allison, you're subscribed, right?
Yeah, I am actually.
Yeah, yeah.
Of
So be
course.
like of course she is, right? Because anything less would be uncivilized. So be like Ref Allison and go ahead and subscribe to the According to Woods podcast. But if you don't believe me, if you don't believe Ref Allison, and I don't know why you wouldn't, here's Pro Wrestler Zeta Zhang.
Hey, this is Zeta Zhang. Make sure you subscribe